Welcome to Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. Our podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? What can we learn from them? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
All right, everybody. Gosh, it's so great for you to join us. And another exciting, informative, and engaging episode of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. I'm your host, Michael Hobbs. And as always, it's just such a privilege to connect with peers and friends and acquaintances across this great industry. And excited to have Ken with us today. Ken, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
That's great. Great for you to be here. Friends, and we don't get to do what we do if you don't do what you do. And your opportunity and responsibility at this point is to step up and hit that subscribe button. And you're going to love Ken. So obviously show some love, hit the like button, because you do what you do best, and that's create market signals. And then you get to analyze them. So you can actually analyze your impact because you subscribed and you like this. And then the word gets out and it spreads, and more people continue to say, wow, that's fantastic. That podcast is unlike anything else out there, and I just enjoy it. It really passes the time well for me, and I get a little insight, a little bit of information, and a little bit of enlightenment through the generosity of your peers. So, Ken, thanks for joining us. And more importantly, we just want to know, were you born this way? Or how did you come to get in touch with the valuation and appraisal profession?
I had a very interesting introduction to appraisal.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I moved to California, and the company I worked for shuttered the business there.
Oh, really?
They wanted me to move back to Albany, New York, and I said no.
Ooh.
I'll stay in Southern California. And I got into property management, and
okay.
My brother got in with a guy at a title company doing exterior appraisals. Back then, 704s, right?
Oh, 704s,
yeah,
okay.
A long time ago. And then he kind of told me what he was doing. I was like, that's interesting. So I started doing exterior appraisals on weekends, and kind of morphed from there. And the guy that introduced him to this whole thing, I became a friend of mine as well, and a mentor. And we ended up going from there. I got out of that rotten business of property management. If you think if you're ever thinking appraising's bad, I can tell you there's stuff that's worse, and that's one of them. So
that's true. I have to agree with you. I've built one from scratch, and it tests your mettle.
Yeah. I just sit there with people that were so vicious to each other. It was I think you become the president of an HOA. Because you got picked on as a kid, and it's your turn to give it back. So
extract your pound of flesh from your neighbors.
Exactly. That's what you do. So, yeah. And then I got into it, and it's kind of really brought me through a lot of different places. My path's much different than everybody else's, probably. Though I did obviously field work, I kind of got introduced to reviewing appraisals probably much sooner than most. And
oh, wow.
I kind of got into institutional side of it and reviewing the work coming in for lending, and it's morphed from there, and here I am today. So 30, Jesus, how many years ago? God almighty. Yeah, 30 plus years ago. I know
30 plus years.
Exactly. I can't count back that far now.
You don't have to. I mean, what's fascinating is to see how far the industry's evolved. I mean, I hear you talk about the opportunity to be doing these 704s on the weekend, probably getting beer money, I'm imagining. Yeah. Help pay the rent and get a little beer money. And then from there, leaving, as you refer to it, that god-awful industry called property management. And did you go to work for the title company, or how did that evolve for you?
Yeah, I did. Started with them, kind of became staff. They started broadening. We started doing not just exterior appraisals. We were doing traditional or 1004s.
Yes.
1073s. There weren't a whole lot of multifamily and stuff at that point, but it was primarily condo and SFR. Yep. And just kind of, like I said, I did that for about 6-8 months. And the guy that brought me in actually went to a lender, and about I don't know, probably 3, 4 months after that, he hired me in starting to look at review work. So
Oh, no kidding.
the first year of appraising, I kind of started doing more reviews than I did, field work. And I'm sure there are people that will listen to this and go, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. But I would tell you, I probably became a lot better appraiser because I
I
saw
agree.
a lot of mistakes, and you kind of learn what not to do versus
Hmm.
just the repetition of doing one thing over and over again without the understanding of whether it's actually really the right way to handle it. So, I got a broad view and many different looks at appraising.
Yeah.
I think it's actually helped me quite a bit throughout my career.
Ken, I couldn't agree with you more so when we, the country went through that difficult time back through the great financial crisis. And, we did a lot of forensic work, and it was a phenomenal training ground.
Yeah.
I don't care how good I was, and I was quite good because my background was in investing first, but the ability to train team members and to, as you said, see mistakes
Yeah.
and not be in that same vein of, hey, I'm going to see one more condo and I'm going to have this same report template and get to read things and sometimes trying to piece things back together. You're like, there's stuff here. It's called a report. I don't know how they got to the conclusion,
Yeah.
but okay.
And
It
I was able to do
definitely
it on a national basis over time as well. So I didn't live in a market. I lived across the country for the most part, seeing how,
phenomenal.
understanding property, the way properties are constructed in different areas. I did that in California, but I grew up in the Northeast. So I was, I kind of understood things anyhow, differences between what you
That's
do in
nice.
California versus what you do in snowy Vermont. And,
Yes.
you just learn. And I think it really broadens the horizon. It kind of makes you think a little differently, that not everything is just this kind of static thing, right? Like there's a lot of ways of analyzing and a lot of ways
Yes.
of trying to look at stuff. And I think so it's treated me well. The industry's treated me well. I got no complaints, that's for sure.
That's amazing. So you get this opportunity to come over to a lender. Did you basically grow with the lender, or were they already nationwide when you joined them?
So at that point, with that particular lender, they weren't nationwide. They had branch offices. They were a little more. There were some regional areas. That stayed for a while. Ultimately, through all those same connections, I did get to a national lender, wholesale lender,
Oh,
back in
okay.
like '95.
Mm-hmm.
And then from '95, I worked with a couple of different places, and kind of like I think it was '98 actually. I went to one and a different national lender, a wholesale lender, and
Yep.
ultimately ran the appraisal department for that lender.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so it was a good experience. Yeah, worked out
Yeah.
well.
That's quite as you pointed out, having the opportunity to live on two different coasts and have kind of just a natural understanding of things because you actually been there.
Hmm,
It makes a world of difference.
it does.
And from that standpoint, you come back to the whole sense of like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, what I was there. I'm like, I mean, yes, I've been exposed to it as well, but yeah, I've shoveled snow, or of course the roof is going to be pitched at that height because that's where the property's built or that's the latitude that it is. But all these things that sometimes are easily taken for granted, but they're far from simple.
Yeah. I had a friend who did, a guy who worked for me back in those days who had added a roof certification to a loan, and it's because of, if you know the Northeast, you may have that metal edging around at the bottom of the roof line.
I mean, so Ken, having had that opportunity to work at a wholesale lender and actually take on all that responsibility because you lived on both coasts, how did you continue to build up your knowledge of property types? Because in some senses it's kind of obvious. Like if you're in a high density area, they're all kind of looking the same. But you get out in other parts of the country, and woof, there's not a lot of similarity.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in New York. I grew up in Vermont. I lived in California for a bunch of years, and I was actually, before I even got into property management appraising, I was at a job that that I was able to actually drive in and out of every in the mid to late 80s. I lived in motels about 7 days a week, and I drove in and out of every state in the continental U.S. So I got to see the
You
country.
did. Holy
So I
smokes.
saw. I saw it on somebody else's dime. It was a lot of fun. I didn't make much money, but boy, did I have a blast. But I got to see a lot of things, right? So you start to kind of understand the geographies, the different ways, things are built and done. My degree's not. I'm not a finance guy. I'm a builder. If you really want to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, is my degree's in electricity. I am someone who I built houses right out of high
Wow.
school, or worked for a
Yeah.
builder, I should say. But so I kind of paid attention to those things, and I think that over time has actually played in well to being an appraiser, is just understanding those things, how there's a lot of different ways of doing things in different parts of the country. Trying to explain a basement to somebody in California didn't make a whole lot of sense to
Oh
them,
my gosh,
right?
that's so true.
Right.
Oh my
And
God.
even here in Texas, they don't, where I am now, they don't really have them. Some places, but they're sparse. But you just kind of get the feeling and the understanding of each, and kind of how they work and function and operate or whatever. So I've seen a lot, and I think that I'm one of those that I don't do the greatest of learning through reading. I do it through
Yep.
experience. So I tend to retain much better
Yep.
that way. So seeing an awful lot of different things across the country just made me, I think, a lot better at what I did long term with
I
appraising.
definitely
So
appreciate that. What was it? What was the employment experience like, having come in doing exteriors and then joining a lender and then moving to the interior and then very quickly getting over into review? A lot of people in the industry are in review, but a lot of people are not. They have no sense of what the world is like and how progression happens and experience develops, other than you just keep looking at more reports, and it's definitely more than that.
you do, and I can't tell you the amount of appraisals I've reviewed in my lifetime, or at least even had my hands on when I became more of the management side of that stuff. But I think it's a mindset. The goal shouldn't be going in to look for everybody's faults. It's, if there's a problem, figure out if it's a correctable one. It's either good for lending purposes, or it's not good for lending purposes, and you figure out how to move the files through the process. It's really interesting when we talk about quality appraisals. Before with my current employer, I ran a bank for 8 years, and it was always interesting talking to my reviewers about good appraisals. And we all may have a different view of what that means. Reviewing appraisals is definitely a skill set. A lot of people may think you're going through and just trying to check off what's wrong or what's right, but we all have a different way of doing things. I mean, I worked for a jumbo lender out in
Mm,
California, and you get two different appraisals on the same property within a day of each other, and it's amazing how different those two appraisals
yes.
are written and how they look. So the fact of the matter is, though, we all think we do things in a very similar fashion, we really don't. You
Yes.
know, and I think that the goal, or the way to be a good reviewer, is to understand what are critical issues and what are minor issues, and figure out how to get past the minors and resolve the criticals, and make sure you got something that's good to lend on.
Yeah, that is indeed an interesting experience. The first couple times it happens, where, as you pointed out, you get two valuation reports on the same property, and you're like, are these the same property?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, you would think you would have pretty similar values. I mean, I'll give you one. I mean, I had one appraisal at $20 million, and the other one was at
Ooh,
$12 million.
ooh, ooh. Yeah.
Same house, effective days are a
Holy
day
cow! I would
apart.
think one was in
So you go
Newport Beach
through.
and the other was in Huntington Beach with those kind of differences. I mean, come on.
Uh, it was Santa
Oh,
Barbara, which made it a
yep.
little bit, yeah, made it a little more
Yes.
difficult. But the point being is, we all think and see things a
Yes.
little differently. We have our standard rules that we have to follow and the way we get there. But the fact is, you know, we all view things through a little bit different lens. And I think that's the one thing you got to understand the one thing that my career's done for me is it's allowed me to look at through a lot of different lenses, and not just this one singular focus, that this is the way it needs to be done. I think there's a lot of ways of
Hmm.
getting there. There truly should be one reasonable outcome, but but there's times where we just don't agree. That's the way this business is.
No, that
So
is definitely the case. How were you guided along the way, and how did you develop the ability to either reconcile, or in some cases, a 20 million and $12 million property, we'll call it the sniff test, but come up with the capacity and knowledge to be able to really get to the value of a property, because that's routinely what it's all about.
I was fortunate enough not to actually have to review
Oh,
that
thank
one. That
goodness!
was my team that
Thank
did that.
goodness!
Yeah, that was my team. But we did a lot of socializing about it, and there were obviously a few comps that just weren't. I won't tell you which
I
way we
understand.
leaned
Well,
on
because
that
it
one. I
doesn't
won't
really
get into
matter
all of
actually,
that.
because you don't have the reports to look at
It,
and the data and the detail and and what's
uh,
credible or not.
Yeah, oddly enough, back then, and looking at those, you don't, the LTVs are so low on those, whether the 12 or
Yeah,
the 20, which one was right, the LTV was
it didn't
still
matter.
nothing. So it wasn't necessarily a big
Yeah.
risk to the bank, but you need to figure out what the right number is. And it was just a difference in that case about what were some of the estate type properties and what was not. And this one did pretty much fall, I think, more to the
Mm.
estate. Thing was, it was a little bit smaller structure on a
Yep.
big lot, and they used blends of each, and the way you got there showed distinctly different
I see.
values. Common sense pretty much drives the way we should deal with this. I mean, theory of
Hmm.
substitution. Who would you buy this? Would the same person buying this buy that? And ultimately, I think that's how we got there. Really, on that one is, we excluded some by saying, no, I just don't think it's the same
Yep.
buyer's market. It's not the same. Doesn't have the same appeal to each.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And then, how did you continue to develop your review capacity? Because I mean, early on, that's being exposed actually by itself is a strong learning, we'll call it module. But to continue to advance and be able to deal with the complexities, there's not a lot of good education out there around this. I mean, this is more one hand on the wheel, one hand on the road, is what I've seen over these decades.
I'd say it's probably as much as your success ends up being right place, right
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
right? I was in organizations that had
Hmm.
needs. I ended up being a good fit for their need. I think one of my stronger suits out of this was trying to figure out how to come up with a good end result. Sometimes as appraisers, we can get locked in and focused and we don't budge. We don't move on things when maybe there is the ability to look at it a little differently. I think I always had, good common sense and the ability to kind of look beyond that sometimes and figure out how to come up with the right answers or the bad or good
Yeah.
answers, right? Maybe there's not always a right answer, right? But there's the ability to kind of not put the lender or the institution in harm's way, and you can still get things to
Yes.
work. And that's, I think, I was fortunate enough to be. I had a lot of support, especially in the 2000s, late 90s into 2000s, where things started really growing and banging, and the wild west
Hmm.
began. But I actually worked for a lender in the subprime world that actually reviewed every
Oh, really?
appraisal. We had a department that did it. Yeah, we never one couldn't it couldn't fund unless my team touched it. I mean, hell, we even had the safeguards built in between our review system and our loan origination
Really?
system that if we had conditions, they moved over to the LOS, and the only people who could sign them, they could only be signed off through my system, not even in the LOS. So they couldn't move to funding if the conditions of the appraisal that we set in our department hadn't been signed off by us through our system. So you couldn't have somebody in just signing off on stuff without it actually being tagged by somebody in the appraisal department. So I've actually been really lucky to have a lot of support in the places I've been. And I know that's not the case for many, that they kind of were always battling uphill, trying to do the right things. And the funding of the loan was number one, not necessarily the quality of
Yep.
the product. I lived in a world that actually I didn't have to worry too much about that. So I'm very fortunate. The places I've been and the people I worked
Yes.
for have actually been supportive of the process.
That is wonderful to hear. From that first lender and then moving on to the next, how have the opportunities come to you? I mean, are you just one of those just good looking, affable people? They just can't help but notice you, or you've got some secret sauce that you just kind of sprinkle in the ethos and things happen? I mean, what do you attribute to the progression of experiences and responsibilities for your career?
So that original mentor had other people that he had worked with, and I'd worked together with them, and then we'd broken off into some different companies, and I was able to stay in good standing with a lot of those people, and it ultimately leveled me up. And then there was one big lesson I learned in 2007 is I hadn't done a good enough job of networking.
Mm.
That is one thing that this industry
Yep.
really needs
Yep.
more of. I think I can speak to the appraiser that's in the field on their own and how they feel probably sometimes like everything's against them and they're kind of living the world on their own. But you know, it's you got to network, man. You've got to be able to sit down and talk to people and just have this network, because when something goes a little bad for you, it's nice to have some people out there that say, "Hey, look, I know of somebody who's looking for somebody with your skill set. Let me introduce you." Up to you to actually get the job, but at the end of the day, if you've got somebody behind you saying, "Hey, you're this guy's got talent, he does a good job," certainly helps you to get into the door for the next. And that's actually helped me from 2007 on. That type of relationship with other people has definitely helped my
Oh, that's
career.
phenomenal. And you've touched on a number of the different places that you've lived. I think one of the fascinating things about review work, as you've alluded to, is it doesn't really matter where you live, given the work that you review.
80% of all businesses fail within 5 years, according to the US Census Bureau. With so many roles and responsibilities that must be managed and have nothing to do with appraisal reports, is it any surprise that it's hard to keep up, much less having a sense of peace, stability, and profitability that comes from growing your business? Given all of this, you might already be thinking about exiting your business one day. Don't miss the limited opportunity to work with Michael, a real estate expert and professional coach. He has worked with more than 300 owners and entrepreneurs to find their highest and best use by solving problems that reach their most important goals. Compress decades of learning into days by working with Michael. Michael is famous in real estate and business coaching. With his help, you can accelerate your growth, increase your quality of life, and earn more money, all while ultimately doing less. Michael helps you not just grow your business, but also find new purpose in it and in your life. If you're ready to take control instead of being controlled, contact him on LinkedIn or email him at michaelh@paru.com.
If you know how to read data, you know how to do things
Yes.
correctly, you can look at a lot of different markets in this country and figure things out. Put it this way, you can do it enough. You may not be able to produce the report, but you can at least see through the data that maybe the appraiser took the right steps and necessary steps to conclude something that's reasonable. And the reviewing to me wasn't that hard to
Yes.
do. I found most of the time when I was talking to somebody from California in a different state, and they'd say, "Well, you're not even in this state." And I said, "Well, tell me this," and you kind of point them through and go, "Well, does that make sense to you?" And it's kind of hard to argue with the facts, right? So, depends on your presentation. I think I was always pretty good with the ability to kind of talk to somebody, talk to them on a
Yep.
reasonable level, and get them to understand my point of view, and see if we couldn't come to some agreement. And it usually worked out.
And I think that's such an underrated ability, and one that people don't talk about enough, and that is the ability to communicate.
Well, but that's exactly what the appraisal
Yes.
is. It's a communication tool. It's to measure risk for a lender, and if you don't communicate it well, how do you measure the risk? How do you understand what you have, and where as a lender is the exposure? And I mean, I think that's the thing that we kind of, I haven't really got into what I do
Yeah.
today, but I know what
Yeah.
I'm doing, and this whole new UAD thing is a better way to communicate your results. And I think for those people that look at UAD 3.6 as a problem, I would say you should look at it as a better communication
Yeah.
device for the future of appraising, because it's much clearer, it's easier to read, and everybody would understand the results much better. and that lends to credibility of the report, right? If I don't know what you're doing, that I can't very well say it's credible, even though you may believe it is.
Yeah, that's a very good point to touch on, and it's you talk about the power of communication. What was it that actually got you to relocate out of Southern California? I mean, that's not always the easiest thing for people to accomplish.
Well, the current role I'm in with my current employer, I suppose people could look me up. I won't get into all of that, but the role I took with my current employer, which has a lot to do with UAD
Yep.
3.6, so I'll let them
Yeah,
read
they
the
can
tea
figure it
leaves
out.
and read between the lines, right? I thought it was a really good opportunity for me. I've had good successes. I've run collateral organizations for banks and for some big lenders in the past, and this was an opportunity to try to make a difference for our
Yeah.
industry. I'm kind of getting on in age, obviously, and to me, this was an opportunity to kind of maybe leave a
Hmm.
mark, a good
Yeah.
mark. In an industry that's been pretty good to me. So
Definitely appreciate that. And because you've had that opportunity to work in multiple areas of the industry, and you've worked in segments that a lot of people don't get exposure to, on we'll call it that side of the curtain, whether it's working for jumbo origination or it's handling subprime. What have you learned and gained exposure to that someone who is on the asset valuation side, the valuer, if you will, doesn't have a full understanding of, or may not have any perspective for, yet it's a huge component in the residential lending space?
yeah, that's a very good question, and maybe not always that easy to answer. I think the biggest thing, so my span of being on the origination side in the subprime space, and then when everything blew up, I went to work for a major bank and worked in there on the servicing and default side, handling 125,000 valuations a
Ooh,
month and trying to sort through all
jeez.
of that and figure out asset
Yeah.
value, right? There's no such thing as, especially in that world, really no such thing as the perfect number. We're trying to weed through an awful lot of information and figure out where our losses
Mm-hmm.
were. And when it came to market and understanding all of that, that was an incredible learning curve for me. I think if you think you're doing an evaluation for the origination side, but then you're trying to evaluate it from a potential default
Mm-hmm.
situation. There's much different ways of doing it, and the rules, especially back
Yes.
then, with Dodd-Frank being well, it hadn't been introduced at
Yes.
that time yet, but it was getting there, that you had an awful lot of information that you were trying to weed through and try to come up with a reasonable number so that we could mark our asset. But there were triggers, like how often do you have to order another valuation? You just don't order it once a year or once every couple of years. Back then you had to cycle through and order them every quarter. I believe when I first got there, that changed a little over time because it became, that's why a lot of BPOs were used, because you couldn't afford to do
Yeah.
appraisals. Plus there weren't enough appraisals to
Mm-hmm.
do them
Mm-hmm.
all. So it was, when you're looking, I've had a lot of different views into way to analyze collateral. My role here where I'm at now is kind of on the risk side within the policy structure, specific to UAD. But it's allowed me to bring a lot of different experiences in to kind of walk through and figure out things. The thing with an appraiser is we tend to live in our own world because of what we do day in and
Yep.
day out. And it's much broader than that, right? Like there's a lot of, I think you asked an appraiser 15 years ago how many times they think their appraisal is
Oh.
looked at. They'd have no idea that it gets
Mm-hmm.
reviewed, 7, 8, maybe 9 times through different channels, moving from a servicer to a servicer, and how that keeps rolling through. And it's a very complex process, and I don't know if they really understand that. I mean, I think if you could, and I don't think you could never make this a mandate of an appraiser, but I think every appraiser, if they could, should work at a lender. I think it would be very eye-opening to them to see how it looks from creating that report to actually taking it through the rest of the lending life cycle and figure out what that looks like and how to handle that. It's definitely two different views into things, and I've been fortunate to see both sides of that.
I think that is a wonderful perspective, and sure, not everybody's going to get the opportunity to work in another segment of the industry, but each additional segment they get to work in, it really just expands one's view and viewpoint of all that goes on. Like you said, if you had any idea how many times that report gets read, not just the one lender and maybe the buyer, if you will. It's, oh my gosh, it's the tip of the iceberg.
It is. It really. I mean, loans. I don't think servicers move the loan quite as rapidly as they did back in the day. But there were a lot of issues with that, especially in the subprime days back when you had it going to an intermediate servicer, and then it sells to one, maybe Wall Street, and then Wall Street sells it off again, and it goes to another. I mean, a loan could go through 3 or 4 different servicers in a matter of the first 4 years of its life cycle. And in each of those times, somebody may not necessarily be reviewing that particular appraisal, or they may. It depends on how they, their due diligence. But, your report gets looked at an awful lot. So, those are, and I don't think you know that or realize that as just that independent fee guy in the field.
Oh, I anybody who's gotten a phone call and over the years, we've gotten any number of them, and you're like, who are you and why are you calling? Wait a minute, and who are you with? Yes, I know the address.
Yeah.
But your name's Ken from where?
Yeah.
And they explain it. And
right.
I'm like, is this a prank call? I'm like, is somebody testing me? Like, is this one of those like secret shopper things? I mean, yes, I completely agree with you there, Ken, in terms of those tests.
But the protection mechanism, so you're not jumping through hoops unwarrantably, is, well, you have client and confidentiality. Yes. So if they're not your client, you really can't talk to them about it. But it is amazing how many people actually look at your reports.
No, that's quite an interesting perspective that it's easy to fall away from. It's like, well, hey, my role, if you will, I'm engaged to determine the market value of that property. Yes, and yes, and that is a risk mitigation tool, and I don't know that the word risk and risk analysis comes into the conversation near enough through the primary education courses that people are exposed to, unfortunately.
No argument with them. No argument with that assessment, right? Like, I think there's, we kind of repeat the classes that we take for CE. I think there's broader views into it. I just don't know that they're very sexy and people would be all that interested. But for those that really kind of crave the knowledge, there's probably a few things out there that you could really take them through the life cycle and get them to understand a little bit better.
I would definitely agree with you on that one. That is fundamentally the case, and it's also inspiring to hear that as you've had multiple opportunities and taken on different roles in different segments of the industry, that you've chosen to, hey, I want to make a mark, not necessarily a skid mark, but I want to make a lasting mark, and that's,
right.
That's quite encouraging. Is that an approach that you have taken throughout your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always wanted more. I want more on my plate. I want to do more. I want to do better. Maybe because I wasn't the great student. Like, things didn't come that natural. I had to work pretty hard for things. So that's I had a mom. Maybe I got it from my mom. I had a mom who, up until 92 years old, was still bartending. So I think I have a work ethic thing in me that I'll never shake. Yeah, she'd have kept on going, but my father, who was 6 years younger, had a stroke, and she decided to take care of him and didn't go back to do it. But up until 92, she was still bartending. So I kind of got this hard work ethic thing in me, and I do enjoy. I take pride in what I do, and sometimes you can't see that necessarily. And I thought this was maybe an opportunity to be able to see that. Like, put in a lot of hard work, and then let's see what it looks like in some years to come, even when I'm gone from this industry, because this will live on for quite some time.
That is a valuable attribute to be reared with. I think some people might say that possibly there's some people out there that they wonder how they could give them a dose of that, maybe a transfusion.
Yeah, I, when my mom passed, I kind of wanted to take her blood and go, there's got to be something in here that's, I think, that's sellable. We could probably put this into the market somewhere, because she was quite an amazing
Yeah,
woman, for sure.
absolutely. Harvest that those red blood cells, and maybe get some platelets out of there. Who knows, a little stem growth opportunity. No telling what might be infused.
One would think, right? So, she made it to 96. She was something
Oh
else,
my
I'll tell you.
gosh. What's
Yeah.
it like for you? As you said, you chose an opportunity to have an impact, and one of those ways is the current migration to call it the results of research and analysis that are more meaningful and useful to the users. And from that perspective, I don't know this for a fact, but as an outsider to having appreciation looking in that direction, some might say that you're kind of in the major leagues, at the top of the profession in terms of the people that you get to work with. And that isn't always the case for a lot of other people. I mean, I was sitting in a airport. Was it yesterday? And I was watching some of the quotes from college students and this whole NIL and transfer portal and all that stuff going on. And a lot of them were referencing they were leaving where they were at, going somewhere else. Yes, the money was nice, but it wasn't about the money. They wanted to play with a team that was going to win. And many people would say that you're a pretty impressive team.
Yeah, I think, the one thing about being here and working with the people I work with here, and even working with our counterpart who's jointly building out this specification, we've got a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds and the way that their careers were that I think have really blended into this thing to make it really good. We've covered a lot of the vantage points, right? Mm-hmm. The in the field appraiser, the review appraiser, the underwriter doing the review, the life cycle, where it goes, how it moves through the process, what can happen to it downstream. How do we build this new thing that works really well for everybody? Very nice reporting structure, you're transparent. It's not, it's very easy to read, and then that works well for those that have to review it, especially in a digital era that we're in. I think this really makes a big difference, because now we can read things with technology, which means a lot less hands touching things, which probably will mean a lot less corrections for people, because you don't have a human and their interpretation of something and asking you to do something a little different, right?
Yeah.
But it's a well blended, great group of individuals. Again, I've been fortunate. I've through my career going to conferences, being lucky enough and fortunate enough to have some higher exposure opportunities at lenders, that I've gotten to know a lot of people. And when you do that, that's how your career starts to move forward, and bigger, broader, bolder opportunities seem to come, are made available. And I was fortunate enough in this particular case for that to happen.
I appreciate you sharing that. And it's very encouraging to hear, especially with your mom slinging drinks right up into the 90s. I mean, it's just anything's possible is what I hear on that one. That's just like, wow.
It most certainly is, right? She made a hell of a margarita, I can tell you that.
Oh, my goodness. So. Talking about wet your whistle. Goodness. Something else.
Yep.
You touched on a little earlier, and just from your perspective as someone who's been a practitioner and obviously lifelong in the profession, about the evolution of reporting in this next is commonly referred to as 3.6. What's one of the benefits? A lot of people say, hey, it's great to be with or in communication for or aware of someone who can see around corners. I think it might be fair to say that you could probably see around some corners. What's going to open up in a positive way for so many people in this profession because of this evolved approach towards, we'll call it, communicating the results of research and analysis? Because I mean, the feedback in general is, oh my gosh, it's change. People don't like change. They're like, oh, it's whatever their comment is. And look, I mean, they didn't used to use cell phones, and they didn't used to use, tires on automobiles, and they didn't used to use electricity. I mean, come on. They had outdoor plumbing. I mean, we've gone through a lot of technological changes. This one is relatively small in the big picture of things, but in the industry, it's massive. And that sense of seeing around the corner, there's a lot of great stuff coming. What maybe there are one or two things that at large you can just say, hey, here's some possibilities.
Well, I'm fortunate enough to see some of the companies that are trying to build to this new 3.6 specification. I can't get into
No, we
naming
ain't gonna do
names
that.
or promoting or anything, so I'm not doing that, right? But I would tell you, I've gotten a view into some pretty slick stuff, things that I think actually make the appraiser's job much easier. Whether it's like a photo recognition AI type of technology, integrated tools that sit outside that you got to go enter into outside of your reporting structure. Now they may be built into the reporting structure, putting in charts and graphs to support adjustments will probably fundamentally be done with ease versus copy and pasting or cropping and putting images into, photo image spaces today or some addendum. I can see and understand why it's overwhelming.
Yep.
But I think once the software comes out and people start to see how neat this thing actually can ultimately be, I think they'll forget about 2.6 pretty quickly and realize 3.6 is not such a bad thing. I don't think quitting. Those that have said I'm leaving the industry, it's too much. I think those that actually decide to go with it will find out that over time it's actually going to probably help for them to communicate their results, and it really won't. It won't overcomplicate what they do. It could simplify on a lot of levels. I believe.
Yeah.
When we started it, we hoped technology would be a big driver of how this is produced.
Yes.
We didn't necessarily know, but now that we're years into this and the way that the advancement of technology is working, I think we're in I would say it's really something to look forward to because it's only going to get better.
Fantastic. And so, I mean, given everything that you've seen, everything you've been a part of, everything you've been exposed to, over the next, say, 3 to 5 years, what are you really looking forward to, or what are you optimistic about? Either way.
Yeah, I'm actually hoping this really does. I mean, a lot of my goal through the project was to make it so that appraisers aren't having to answer a lot of stupid questions that they get today. The constant back and forth between lender, underwriter, appraiser. Can you address this? Please do this. It's on page 23. How come you didn't see it? Right? Those kinds of things. This structure and this layout should eliminate a lot of that. And I really hope that we've achieved a good goal of an appraiser, once they're done with their assignment, is kind of done with their assignment and they can keep it off their desk, and it doesn't seem to keep coming back for the revisit of little things that don't really impact anything. And we're actually hoping, like I said, that if as each incremental year goes on, as we start to move down this pathway, that the technologies get better that can be integrated into these software packages, that I think actually make it much easier on the appraiser to produce much better reports. And I do believe I believe wholeheartedly in that, and I think it's going to make our profession a lot more professional. I think people will start to see that over time, and it really will lend to the profession itself and the credibility of each assignment.
Got it. Well, Ken, I love it. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing a little bit of time and a little bit of perspective of the decades you've been around the industry.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Michael. You do a great job with this, and I think you get a lot of different perspectives, and hopefully a lot of people really listen to it and take it to account and realize that we got a lot of different ways of looking at our industry and viewing it, but we all need to kind of head in the same path. And if we can do that together, we'll definitely improve what we have and what we do for a career.
I definitely agree with it. Well, Ken, I appreciate it. Friends, thanks for joining us, and thanks for doing what you can only do, and that is like the podcast. Feel free to comment as more importantly. And, if you haven't figured out where Ken's at, you can easily look that one up. It's publicly available as well. And thanks for subscribing. It's you make a difference. Ken, appreciate you joining us.
Take care, my friend. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Appraisals, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing professional paths and achievements of our beloved guests. Before we go, please subscribe on your listening channel, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. After you drop a comment below, who is one friend and peer you can generously share this episode with? If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Appraisals, Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.